I am Captain Spawn, and this is day 330 of Spawn Year. Todd McFarlane has a gift, a talent that almost rivals his artistic ability, of putting his foot in his mouth about the most glaring problem with one of his issues in the letters pages of that very issue. I don't know how he does it. Someone will criticize him for something he did in another comic, he'll do that very same thing in spades in a new comic, and then that letter will appear there where it's more visible and relevant than it's ever been. Man, have I missed Todd McFarlane. I haven't had this kind of material to work with in a long time. A fan writes in and tells Todd that if he can't have more story consistency and won't stop wrapping up arcs with Deus Ex Machinas, he's done. He's saying the very same thing I have been. Deus Ex Machina is this guy's word choice, not mine. I imagine if McFarlane got a hold of my notebooks, very little of what he found here would be new to him, except all that stuff about Mountain Dew sugar comas and beady-eyed Batman who turned into velociraptors and white, frazzled-haired psychopaths obsessed with Pop-Tarts. And here is McFarlane's whole response to that letter. Here's the upside and downside of having a book that's successful for so many years. I'm not inclined to get married to every single thing that's been put down in this comic book. So again, we will try to come up with plausible reasons as to why we're walking away from something that was presented differently by me or another writer or artist at another point. Where I'm at, what you end up doing is taking a look at the 185 issues preceding the current story and use the good parts, the best parts, but not all of the parts. So we will do three things. We will take the pieces that I think are worthy of moving forward and bring them into the current storyline. We will take some of the pieces that I thought didn't work quite as well or that needed an upgrade, and we will basically rework those things or bring those forward. Then, there's just a whole pile of things we're just going to walk away from. Why? Just because you put it down once does not mean you should be a slave to it. It's like saying that if I did a drawing when I was 6 years old, now that I'm 26 years old, I should adhere to that drawing I did when I was 6 because it came first. I feel that I'm better. We're better at telling the story, we're better at drawing the books, and just because we did something in the past that wasn't quite up to those standards doesn't mean that we need to be a slave to it. And we're not going to be. Hopefully you can roll with the punches, and if not, then I appreciate all the support you've given us in the past. McFarlane doesn't seem to understand why anyone cares that he maintain a cohesive and coherent continuity. Like anyone who notices that, say, Clown didn't used to have his own corporeal body or be able to turn into his Violator form, but now he does, and scratches their heads about it, are nitpicking. That what matters is what's out this month, not what came out last month, and that if it's new, it's better and relevant by virtue of being what he's trying to sell now. It's interesting that despite that attitude, there's an ad here for a collection of the earliest issues called Spawn Origins, the very title suggesting those stories should inform what comes later, and that this is a fully realized, expansive, and evolving world, not one where the only events that count are the ones the writer happens to like today. I understand the position of not wanting to be a slave to continuity. When you have a 17 years worth to keep up with, it's nigh impossible to never contradict anything that came before. But most writers at least try. McFarlane's been ignoring whatever he decides he wishes he hadn't written since issue 3. That's not the same as changing what didn't work. That's lack of forethought. And if your continuity is so convoluted and unstable that it feels like the bottom's about to drop out, well, that's why DC invented crises. If you want to reinvent the wheel, like McFarlane has all but done here, you need a reboot. You can't put that wheel on a car with 3 totally incompatible wheels and expect it to go anywhere. You need a new car, and in the case of Spawn, none of those wheels ever belonged on the same vehicle together. Some people are continuity snobs, yes. who refuse to acknowledge the merits of an otherwise tight and well-constructed story that stands great on its own, but technically belongs to a greater continuity that it's contradicting, shouldn't exist, and is therefore awful. And I've never thought that was fair. Worthwhile criticism, but it doesn't necessarily ruin the whole piece. That's never been the case with Spawn, because it's one long, never-ending story. McFarlane expects readers to stay with him for years and years before he finally drops a major revelation, because it's always about a big mystery, yet he wants to have the flexibility to contradict any detail, event, or even a prior bombshell revelation readers waited years to learn on the way there. If all that matters is this month's issue, tell self-contained 22-page stories. To say, I don't like that canonical thing you saw happen and paid money to see happen anymore, so it doesn't count, but I'll reference token events I've decided to include to create the illusion of continuity, is to not play fair at all with an audience. And this issue is just one broad sweeping retcon. If you'd never read Spawn prior to Endgame, you'd think McFarlane just revealed all kinds of interesting, useful tidbits about the celestial mythology. But if you're me, your entire last few months were entirely wasted. Clown goes to an old demon's house who's passing for human and tries to bully him into getting back into the evil terrorizing game. He's not interested, as he's been hiding from his masters for years in plain sight, and if they found him, an insubordinate deserter, he'd be puppy chow. Most of the issue is Clown explaining his plans and acting as a mouthpiece for McFarlane as he, well, reinvents the wheel, and that's all intercut with silent action scenes of Spawn trying out his new suit, looking all dramatic and ripping off the first issue, falling down, and stopping bad guys. And I'll admit, some of that is cleverly worked in with Clown's narrative. At the end, Clown has gruesomely ripped apart one of the demon's prize-winning dogs to show him he means business, and I'm sure that's supposed to cleverly symbolize that he's now Clown's lapdog. Clown, who is now calculating, well-spoken, not at all silly or wisecracking, a completely different character. The explanation, which a couple issues ago seemed to be he was playing the fool, is now he used to be crazy but now he's sane. I am baffled by what that means or how it happened. But then again, I'm baffled by all of this. Now that Spawn seems to be off the board, Clown wants to go against his masters, the Elders, take over the world, and by so doing, have, quote, a direct pipeline to God himself. What? A, who are these elders who rule hell? Why have we never heard of them if they made you? Don't you have parents per the Violator mini? And what was Bulgy if these elders are in charge? B, heaven and hell were cut off from earth. And C, God and the devil were sniveling children who are currently fighting off in some limbo for all eternity. God is not in charge anymore. And yeah, maybe Clown just didn't get the memo, but I highly doubt that's where this whole thing is headed. I'm pretty sure 5 issues into this, McFarlane just retconned Armageddon and very likely the entire origin of the universe. You couldn't have done that out the gate? Maybe given us a nice disclaimer saying, sorry, issues 150 to 184 are completely ridiculous and no longer count in the canon of Spawn. Although the last thing that's even referenced besides Mammon just existing is the death of Malbolgia, so maybe nothing counts after 100. But lots of stuff doesn't count from before that, and stuff McFarlane wrote, unless it's decided it suddenly does, so who cares? This universe never had any concrete rules, and neither does McFarlane. Selective amnesia and false planted memories. That's what McFarlane gives to Hellspawns, and that's what he tries to give to the reader. You want to enjoy Spawn? You just gotta learn how to be a puppet that believes whatever you're told at $3 an issue. Signed, Captain Spawn.